So let's dive into a really profound idea, one that kind of sits at the crossroads of philosophy, physics, and spirituality. We're going to talk about the very nature of reality and, well, our place in all of it. Let's get started.
I want to start with a pretty direct question for you. Think about it. You feel like a distinct person, right? You're an individual inside your body looking out at the world. But what if that core feeling, that fundamental sense of you versus everything else, what if that's not the whole picture?
You know, even Albert Einstein, one of the greatest scientific minds ever, called this exact feeling of separation an optical delusion of his consciousness. That's a really powerful way to put it. The idea that our most basic, fundamental perception of ourselves might just be a grand illusion.
So here's our game plan for how we're going to unpack this. First, we'll look at that optical delusion. Then, we'll see how that idea shapes our concepts of good and evil. After that, we'll explore the quantum connection that points to a whole different reality. And finally, we'll talk about what it means to shift from I to we and how all of this helps us face our biggest fears.
All right, let's dig into that first point. What did Einstein really mean by that? What exactly is this illusion that we're all supposedly living inside of?
In a lot of spiritual traditions, this concept has a name, Maya. It's the incredibly powerful perception that we're all these separate, isolated little beings, cut off from each other and from the world. It's that feeling, you know, the one that tells you that you stop where your skin ends and the rest of the universe begins right there.
And the thinking goes that this feeling of separation isn't just some small mistake. It's actually the root cause of our biggest problems. I mean, think about it. If you feel isolated, you're going to feel vulnerable, which of course breeds fear. And to protect that fragile little self, you build up an ego. And the constant need to defend that ego, well, that leads directly to suffering.
So, if the whole idea of a separate self is an illusion, what other illusions does it create? This brings us to some really fundamental concepts we use to judge the world: good and evil.
You know, we tend to see the world in these stark dualities, good versus evil, right versus wrong. But from this more unified perspective, they're not really these epic opposing forces. They're just labels, mental constructs that we create. It's kind of like hot and cold. They seem like complete opposites, but they're really just different points on a single spectrum of temperature, right? This view sees good and evil the same way, just different expressions or maybe different frequencies of the same underlying energy.
Okay, so if separation is the illusion, what's the reality? This is where things get really fascinating, because this is where modern physics and ancient mysticism start to sound, well, surprisingly similar.
The alternative to separation is union. It's this idea that everything, you, me, the chair you're sitting on, the stars in the sky, it's all just an interconnected part of a single huge field of consciousness. Some might call it source or God. In physics, this sounds a lot like the quantum field, where on the most basic level, particles can be entangled. They're linked in such a way that what happens to one instantly affects the other, no matter how far apart they are. It really points to this deep, fundamental connection that underlies everything.
So let's just quickly recap the main ideas here. First, our sense of being separate individuals is the primary illusion. Second, that illusion leads us to create these artificial dualities, like good and evil. And third, the real reality underneath it all is one of total interconnection, a union with a single conscious source.
Okay, so what does any of this actually mean for how we live our lives? I mean, if we're all connected, what's the whole point of being an individual? The implications here are, well, they're massive.
From this point of view, the purpose of life isn't about fighting some big external evil force. The real battle is internal. The goal is to wake up from the illusion of the egocentric I, and to shift our awareness to the collective we, to really, truly live from a place of knowing that we are all deeply interconnected. And this leads to such a powerful and simple ethical conclusion. If we're all just different expressions of the same consciousness, then harming another person isn't just morally wrong, it's completely illogical. You are, quite literally, harming a part of yourself. Suddenly, empathy and love aren't just nice ideals, they become the most natural and logical way to exist once you see reality clearly.
Okay, and that brings us to the big one, our final point. If the illusion of separation is the source of all our fear, then understanding our true connection to everything should address our ultimate fear, the fear of death.
Our minds are basically survival machines, right? They're wired to protect the body and the ego that they identify with. The mind actually thinks it's the one in charge, that it is consciousness, but from this perspective, that's a mistake. Who you really are isn't the temporary mind or the temporary body, it's the timeless, pure awareness. You could call it spirit that is simply experiencing life through them.
So the crucial takeaway here is that there's really nothing to fear. Think of it this way. If you're a wave, you might be terrified of crashing on the shore. But if you realize you are the entire ocean, what is there to be afraid of? Death isn't an end, it's a return. It's just sinking back into that vast sea of pure consciousness, described here as a state of unconditional love.
And so we're left with this one big, lingering question. If our entire experience of being a separate person is a kind of dream, then what does it really mean to be awake? What is the reality we have yet to fully experience? Something to think about. Thanks so much for joining me.